Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into something really central to recovery and honestly to mental health in general. It's this gap, this painful difference between just stopping a behavior like drinking and actually finding, real inner peace.
That's right. We're looking at what's often called the dry drunk phenomenon. Someone's sober physically, but inside. They're still caught up in all the old thinking, the old misery.
Exactly. It's that white knuckle feeling versus what our sources describe as a contented sobriety.
It's a huge distinction.
Yeah.
And frankly, one that a lot of people outside recovery don't quite grasp. The material we're looking at is pretty blunt about it.
Uh-huh.
Anyone can get sober. We've all done it lots of times.
We've all been there. Maybe stop for a week, a month.
Right. But the real trick, it says, is to stay and to live sober. Getting the alcohol out. That's often, believe it or not, the easier bit. The real challenge, the real deep dive here, is changing the internal stuff, the thinking, the emotions, that whole machinery, really. That's what gets you from just not drinking, which can be miserable, to what they call a joyous experience.
A state where you actually prefer being sober.
Yeah, genuinely prefer it over all the chaos and trouble of drinking.
So that's the conflict we need to unpack for you today. You stop the substance, the body clears out, but the underlying storm, the reason you reached for it in the first place, that's still raging inside. And we're going to trace the path laid out in text describing the 12 steps, looking at how they're designed to force that psychic and emotional change needed to get from just dry to this new dimension freedom under God.
And you can see it, can't you? When you look at someone who's newly sober but just looks profoundly unhappy, that's the white knuckle experience right there. They've stopped the behavior, but the internal war.
Yeah.
They're losing it.
Okay, let's start right there. Because there's this common idea, especially if you haven't been through it, that you stop drinking and boom, everything gets better. Smooth sailing.
Right. The happily ever after myth of sobriety.
Yeah, but the dry drunk really proves that wrong. It shows the fight wasn't just with the bottle, was it? It's with this whole internal system that seems, well, rigged for misery sometimes. So what's going wrong with that willpower model?
Well, that's the first big stumbling block, isn't it? The idea that recovery is just about having enough willpower, gritting your teeth.
Just deciding harder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the sources we're drawing on, they're clear. For the person deep in addiction, especially late stage, that will to resist is often just gone. It has fled, as they put it. They simply don't have the internal resources left to fight it off on their own, especially when all that underlying pain starts bubbling up. They've used up all their self-control just getting through the day.
And then trying to force it, trying to use that depleted willpower like a blunt instrument on this really complex internal problem, that's where the sheer exhaustion comes in, the frustration.
It absolutely is. It becomes counterproductive. Think of it like trying to jam the wrong piece into a jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
You keep pushing, getting more frustrated, using more force, but it's just the wrong piece. The issue isn't necessarily having willpower that's just, energy, direction. It's the misuse of willpower.
How so?
Trying to bombard problems with it, as one source says, using your own limited self-focused will to fix everything instead of maybe aligning that will with something bigger, a different direction. Relying only on yourself just feeds the core problem.
And why are they fighting so hard? Why the white knuckles, the exhaustion? It's because they're still desperately trying to avoid something, aren't they? That emotional reality, they used alcohol to numb out.
Absolutely. That's key. You have to remember, for many people, alcohol or whatever substance wasn't just about having fun. It was a solution.
Medication.
A fast-acting medication, for deep emotional conflict, for pain they couldn't cope with. It was designed, consciously or not, to block out the reality of life, to just shut down the noise inside.
So when you take that medication away, that reality comes flooding back. And it's terrifying. We're talking about those really deep, painful feelings, right?
Things like core emptiness, maybe unresolved grief, deep sadness, shame, so much shame. And often this undirected, simmering rage. And when those feelings hit, especially early on, the reaction is just visceral. It's panic. It's a flight response.
Get me out of here.
Totally. One person in the source material put it perfectly. Anxiety looms and you think, this is why I drank. The immediate thought, the cry from inside is just, anesthetize me, fuck it.
Wow.
The dry drunk is still living in that state where any significant emotional pain triggers this desperate need for chemical relief.
Which brings us right back to that paradox of just being abstinent. The shakes might stop, the physical dry jitters, they might fade.
Sure, the acute withdrawal passes.
But that deeper feeling, that sense of dread maybe, or just internal chaos that sticks around.
Hmm.
What's the real difference in attitude, do you think, between the dry drunk and someone who's found that contentment?
Well, a huge part of it is where the focus lies. The dry drunk is still chronically preoccupied with self. Their whole emotional world, their radar, it's all pointed inward. So every little challenge, every perceived slight, every inconvenience, it lands like an existential threat. It's all about me.
And just stopping the substance doesn't automatically fix that self-absorption.
Not at all. Plus, you've got the brain chemistry angle. Just being abstinent doesn't erase the fact that the brain still remembers that chemical fix. It still craves it.
Yeah.
You're dealing with this chronic desire, this wanting that's fueled by, well, by an addicted brain that hasn't forgotten how good that instant relief felt.
Okay, so that leads us right into the core diagnosis then. If someone is sober but still miserable, still white-knuckling it, what do these texts say is the absolute root cause?
The source material is, well, it's incredibly direct. Almost shockingly so. It states, flat out, our serious problem is self-centeredness.
Self-centeredness, that's it.
That's the core defect they identify.
Yeah.
They don't mince words. They describe the alcoholic as the extreme example of self-will run riot. Just totally consumed by self-pity, self-seeking, focusing only on themselves. And it all stems, they say, from pride, a debilitating kind of pride.
That's a heavy diagnosis, that this internal state, self-centeredness, is literally fatal. How does that work? Does it mean you're doomed for relapse, or is just the sober life itself unbearable?
It seems like both, really. The trajectory they lay out is, well, it's stark. We must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us.
Kills us how?
Because that kind of extreme self-centeredness creates total isolation. You genuinely believe you're the center of the universe and everything happens to you or for you. That pride cuts you off from real connection, from help.
Oh, okay.
And that self-absorption almost guarantees relapse, doesn't it? Because the moment the world doesn't meet your demands, which, let's face it, is constantly,
Right.
the internal discomfort becomes unbearable. And because you're isolated, because your pride blocks you from seeking real solutions, the only relief you remember, the quickest fix, is
Back to the substance.
back to the substance. The self-will runs riot until it basically destroys its host, either through sheer misery or eventually driving him back to drinking or using.
So it's not just a personality flaw. It's like a failure mode for the whole emotional system. But now we also have the science, don't we, that helps explain why this self-focus feels so bad, even without the substance. Let's bring in that neuroscience piece.
Yeah, this is fascinating, looking at the actual hardware. We know addiction involves real molecular changes in the brain's reward and craving pathways. Dopamine is a key player here.
And most people think dopamine equals pleasure, right?
That's the common idea, but it's not quite right. Our sources and neuroscience generally describe dopamine more accurately as the fuel of desire, not fun. It's the motivator. It drives the wanting, the seeking.
Okay, so it makes you want things. So what happens when a drug like alcohol just floods that system, bypasses all the normal ways we get motivated or rewarded?
Well, the brain hates being out of balance. It wants homeostasis. So to cope with that massive, unnatural surge of dopamine and other effects, it starts making what scientists call compensatory adaptations.
Trying to push back?
Exactly. Trying to regain equilibrium. One critical adaptation involves a natural painkiller called dynorphin. The brain produces more of it. Now, initially, this might protect the system a bit, but the long-term result, the constant presence of the drug basically wears out or depletes the brain's natural pleasure and reward circuits.
So the person who stops drinking isn't just choosing to be miserable. Their actual brain hardware is kind of rigged against feeling good.
That's a really good way to put it. Over time, the brain of a chronic user becomes less and less able to get satisfaction or enjoyment from normal everyday things.
Like a sunset or coffee or talking to a friend.
Exactly. Those things just don't register the same way. The ability to enjoy normal life has been physically dampened, altered by the drug use. So when you stop the substance, what are you left with?
Uh-oh.
You're left with depleted brain chemistry, a baseline feeling of flatness, dissatisfaction, maybe even low-grade depression or anxiety. And you have the powerful, ingrained memory of how incredibly good and fast that chemical relief felt.
Wow, that's the biological setup for the dry drunk state.
It really is. It's deep, entrenched dissatisfaction, and it's often mistaken for just having a bad attitude or not trying hard enough.
Okay, so if that's the state, chemically depleted, psychologically locked into self-focus, what's the way out? What does someone need to actually move from just being dry and miserable to, well, contented?
The way out, according to these sources, demands two things above all else: honesty and humility.
Honesty and humility.
They're presented as absolutely essential. And humility here isn't about shame or thinking you're worthless. It's defined very practically as a true evaluation of conditions as they are.
Seeing reality clearly.
Exactly. Realism. About yourself, your limits, your place in the grand scheme of things. It's seen as crucial for any real spiritual progress.
And honesty.
Honesty is defined as freedom from self-deception. It's about committing to seeing things exactly as they are, without the usual filters we use, especially pride and fear.
But there's the rub, isn't it? Because the addicted mind, the self-centered mind we were just talking about, it actively fights against those things. Pride tells you.
You need not pass this way.
Right. You're different, you're smarter, you can figure this out yourself.
And fear whispers.
You dare not look. Don't look too closely at your flaws, your mistakes, because you'll be overwhelmed.
That's the perfect catch-22 of the dry drunk state. The solution requires exactly what the problem prevents you from doing. Accepting your limitations, admitting you need help, seeing yourself realistically, connecting with others who've been there, connectedness with other alcoholics, as the text says.
So the very first step out is just being willing to stop fighting that reality, to start seeing things as they are.
That willingness seems to be the key that unlocks the door.
And that doorway, that acceptance, leads directly into the roadmap we mentioned, the 12 steps, which are really, when you break them down, a sequence of actions designed to dismantle that self-will and rebuild things from the inside out.
Right. The whole process really kicks off with step 1, which is all about that acceptance, that surrender. It's often described, maybe counterintuitively, as the beginning of freedom.
Like the Chuck C. story.
Exactly. His experience really highlights how that genuine spiritual growth, that renewal, it only starts when you fully acknowledge and accept the problem. It's that surrender of the self-will, the moment you finally say, deep down, I can't do this alone, my way doesn't work. That's when you stop forcing that wrong puzzle piece.
Okay, so that surrender, that acceptance opens the door. And then step 3 is about deciding to turn your will and your life over to the care of a higher power. We talked about how self-will run riot is the problem. How does step 3 fix that?
It fundamentally redirects the will. Instead of using your own personal will to fight every battle, to control everything, you make a conscious choice to align your will with something larger than your own ego.
A power greater than yourself.
Right. And this is where the concept of a higher power becomes really practical, even for people who aren't traditionally religious. It doesn't have to be a specific deity. For many, it's simply good orderly direction. G-O-D.
Yeah, G-O-D, good orderly direction. I like that. So if the problem is self-will run riot,
the solution is aligning with good orderly direction. Makes sense.
It does. But wait, for someone who's been fiercely independent, maybe controlling, the idea of turning your will over, depending on something external, that sounds like losing control, losing autonomy. Why is that dependence actually described as the way to real independence?
That's one of the great paradoxes of this path. This seeming dependence is actually called the chief source of strength. Think about it. When you rely only on your own ego, your own limited resources, you're actually incredibly fragile. You're constantly being knocked around by circumstances, by your own moods, by what other people do.
True.
But when you surrender to, or align with, a power greater than yourself, whether that's God as you understand him, or the collective wisdom of a group, or just the principle of doing the next right thing, good orderly direction, you're no longer limited by your own shortcomings. You tap into a source of strength that isn't dependent on how you feel that day. That is real freedom, independence from the tyranny of your own ego.
Okay, that makes sense. So acceptance, surrender, aligning the will. But the real heavy lifting, the part that really distinguishes contented sobriety from just being dry, seems to happen in the next steps, 4 and 5, the inventory.
Oh, absolutely. Steps 4 and 5 are where you really get into the nuts and bolts of dismantling that self-centered structure. They're the diagnostic tools, the internal house cleaning.
Going way beyond just not drinking.
Way beyond. They force this brutally honest look at yourself. Your resentments, your fears, your patterns in relationships, your part in things. Step 4, the inventory. It's not just listing bad things you did. It's a deep dive into why. Why did I feel that resentment? What fear was driving that behavior? What was my part?
It sounds like self-analysis, really.
It is, but with a specific focus and structure. And it's crucial to do it thoroughly. There's a great anecdote about how getting it wrong can actually reinforce the old problems.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, there's a story about a woman, let's call her Natalie. She did her step 4, made this huge list of her character defects, her mistakes, everything she'd done wrong.
Okay.
But She completely left out the parts about what other people had done to her. She didn't list her resentments properly, didn't acknowledge the harm she'd suffered.
But why would she do that?
Maybe out of a kind of misguided sense of taking responsibility. Or maybe just avoiding the pain of looking at those hurts. But the result was she missed the context. Her behavior didn't happen in a vacuum. It was often a reaction to how others treated her, to her environment.
So by ignoring their part, she couldn't see the whole picture of her own pattern.
Yeah, exactly. She ended up taking 100% responsibility for situations that were maybe 50-50, or even less her fault. And instead of leading to humility, it just fed her shame and this weird kind of pride, like, look how awful I am. Mm-hmm. It didn't lead to real understanding or the ability to forgive others.
That's a really important point. The inventory isn't just about beating yourself up. It's about seeing the whole dynamic, including how you were affected by others.
Right. It's relational. And then comes step 5, admitting to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs.
Oof. That sounds like the really tough one, sharing all that stuff you just dug up.
It's often described as the most difficult, frightening.
Yeah.
But also absolutely essential. Think about it. Confession, sharing secrets. It's an ancient practice for a reason.
Why? What does it do?
It breaks the isolation. It deflates the ego like nothing else. Keeping all that stuff locked inside just feeds the shame and the sense of being uniquely awful. Saying it out loud to another person who understands, it brings it into the light.
And the result?
The sources say it leads to a profound loss of that crushing isolation and brings tranquility and consciousness of God. You achieve a level of honesty and self-acceptance that just wasn't possible before. And that sets the stage perfectly for the next crucial steps, the ones aimed directly at those chronic negative emotions, the stuff that keeps the dry trunk miserable.
Okay, so steps 6 and 7.
Right.
These feel like the direct antidote, then, to that internal misery we've been talking about. Step 3 was about willingness to surrender the will, generally. These seem more specific. About the defects found in step 4.
Exactly. Step 6 is becoming entirely ready for your higher power to remove all these defects of character. And step 7 is humbly asking for that removal.
Entirely ready. That sounds absolute. Does that mean perfect readiness?
That's a great question. And no, the distinction is subtle but really important. You're not expected to be perfect or even to have the defects removed instantly. The focus is on becoming ready, willing.
So it's about the willingness, not achieving instant perfection.
Precisely. The sources emphasize that the crucial thing is making a start. Recognizing that this is about progress, not perfection. Perfection isn't possible for humans anyway.
Why is that distinction, progress, not perfection, so vital right here? And what happens if someone resists at this point or just delays, puts it off?
Well, think about the self-centered mind again. It often demands perfection, right? If I can't do this perfectly right now, then what's the point?
Yeah, the all or nothing thinking.
Exactly. And that's just another form of pride. Trying for instant perfection sets you up for failure, which leads right back to self-pity, resentment, and maybe justifying a return to drinking. So focusing on progress keeps it realistic.
And delaying, resisting becoming ready.
The sources warn that can be fatal to achieving contented sobriety. If you delay, if you rebel against this step, you're essentially choosing to hold on to those character defects, the selfishness, the fear, the dishonesty, the resentment.
The very things causing the misery.
The very things. You're keeping the internal machinery clogged up. And it's only a matter of time before that pressure builds and leads to some kind of psychic breakdown, or most likely a return to the substance. You stay stuck in that exhausted, dry state.
Okay, and step 7 then, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. That word humbly comes up again. It seems tied directly back to that definition of humility as seeing reality clearly.
It is. Humility here is described as the avenue to true freedom of the human spirit. It's about a fundamental shift in attitude. It means moving out of ourselves toward God, or toward that good, orderly direction.
How does that transform the misery?
Because step 7 asks us to recognize that the main thing activating our defects is usually self-centered fear. Fear of not getting what we want, fear of losing what we have, fear of what others think. Humility allows us to see that fear, admit we can't handle it alone, and ask for help from that higher power to remove the compulsion driven by that fear.
Okay, practical question though. If someone's had these patterns, maybe dishonesty or anger or fear for decades, do they just disappear when you ask humbly? Poof.
Yeah, that's a really important expectation to manage. The answer is almost certainly no, not instantly, and maybe not ever completely. It's crucial for you, the listener, to understand this is about sustained effort. These are often lifelong patterns, deep grooves in our personality, our ways of coping. They stick around for a while.
So what does step 7 promise then?
It promises the removal of the bondage of these defects, meaning you're no longer compelled by them. You gain the freedom to choose a different response. You might still feel the anger, but you don't have to act on it destructively. You might still feel fear, but it doesn't have to paralyze you.
It's about freedom from them controlling you.
Exactly. And achieving that takes patience, continued effort, ongoing self-awareness, and constantly reinforcing that humble attitude. The change in attitude, the humility, that's the real miracle here.
Okay, so once that internal shift is really happening, the will surrendered, the inventory done, the readiness and asking for removal underway, the focus kind of shifts again, doesn't it, to keeping it going. Maintenance.
Right. We move into the later steps, which are all about living this new way, sustaining that contented sobriety so you don't slip back into just white-knuckling it.
And the big payoff described is the spiritual awakening in step 12.
That's the result of working the previous steps.
Yeah.
It's described as a fundamental qualitative change in consciousness, not necessarily, fireworks or a burning bush.
Right.
But a new way of thinking, feeling, behaving. Your whole internal operating system changes. And the sources say that once you've had that kind of shift, the idea of going back to the old ways, back to addiction, actually seems too stressful, too painful to even contemplate.
You found something better.
Something so much better, so much more peaceful, that the old life loses its appeal. It becomes more stressful than ever to think about returning.
Life still happens, right?
Yeah.
Challenges don't disappear. So how do you maintain that peace, that contentment? That's where step 10 comes in.
Step 10 is absolutely crucial for maintenance. It's the ongoing, continuous inventory. It's basically the early warning system against slipping back into faulty thinking.
Faulty thinking. The old patterns.
Exactly. The sources say to constantly watch for those danger signs: selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, because they will creep back in.
It's not a one-and-done fix.
Not at all. And when those old feelings or thoughts crop up,
Mm-hmm.
Step 10 gives you the solution. Immediate action. Don't let it fester.
What kind of action?
First, ask your higher power right then and there to remove it. Second, talk about it with someone else, sponsor, trusted friend immediately. Get it out of your head.
Right.
And third, if you were wrong, make any necessary amends quickly. Don't let it build.
So it's like a constant emotional tune-up. Nip it in the bud before it grows into that overwhelming pressure that leads back to misery or relapse. Can you give an example of how that works? Catching the faulty thinking?
Sure. Think about the woman mentioned in one source. She was feeling really agitated, angry, stressed out all the time. And she was convinced it was her job, her partner, the traffic, external stuff.
Blaming the world.
Totally. Classic dry, drunk thinking, right? But she was encouraged to do a quick step 10 inventory. Just jot down what was bothering her and her part in it. And when she read it out loud to her sponsor, the pattern just leaped off the page. The recurring theme wasn't the external situations. It was her internal reaction. It was her own pride and arrogance, her need to be right, her need to control things. Her faulty thinking was basically, the world isn't meeting my expectations, and it should.
And realizing that.
Realizing that allowed her to stop blaming the traffic and start asking for humility, for acceptance. And apparently her peace of mind returned almost immediately, even if the external situation hadn't changed at all.
That's the key difference, isn't it? The dry drunk blames the circumstances. The person in contented sobriety looks at their reaction, their internal state.
That's it in a nutshell.
And that level of personal responsibility connects directly to step 9, doesn't it? Making amends for past harms, cleaning up the wreckage.
Yes, step 9 is huge. Making direct amends wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. It's about taking responsibility, not just feeling sorry.
And it's not just about making yourself feel better, right?
No, primarily it's about trying to repair the damage caused by our past behavior, our sins of commission or omission, as they say. It's about acknowledging the harm and offering restitution where appropriate, putting things right.
But there's a potential pitfall here too, isn't there? A warning about how amends can sometimes be mishandled.
Yes, very important. The caution is crucial. Amends should not injure others. And sometimes that injury can be subtle. It's not just about, say, revealing an affair that would destroy a family. It can also be about becoming self-absorbed in the process of making amends.
How does that happen?
Well, there's an anecdote about a mother in Al-Anon, years into recovery. She was still making these never-ending amends to her daughter for things that happened long ago.
Constantly apologizing.
Constantly apologizing, bringing up old wounds, dwelling on her own guilt. But the daughter, she was actually ready to forgive, ready to move on. The mother's constant guilt-ridden apologies were actually burdening the daughter, interfering with their present relationship.
Wow. So the mother was kind of using the amends process to keep managing her own shame rather than actually setting her daughter free.
Exactly. The goal is restitution and taking responsibility, setting the other person free if possible, not getting stuck in your own guilt trip indefinitely.
That really reframes the purpose. It's about freedom for everyone involved.
Okay, speaking of freedom, what about forgiving others? Especially people who've really hurt us deeply. That can feel impossible sometimes. Do the sources offer any practical advice on that?
They do, and the insight is quite profound, I think. It suggests that forgiveness isn't necessarily about forcing yourself to like the person who wronged you. That might just be impossible.
Okay, so what is it then?
It's more about cultivating a willingness to forgive and focusing on what they call impersonal goodwill, charity in the classical sense.
Impersonal goodwill. Yeah. Like, you don't have to like them. You don't have to want to hang out with them. But you can become willing to wish them well, to hope they find peace, hope they find their own recovery, hope things go well for them, just as another human being, even if you keep your distance.
So it's about releasing the resentment for your own sake by adopting an attitude of goodwill, even if the feelings of liking aren't there.
Precisely.
Oh.
Because resentment, the sources say, is the #1 offender. It destroys more people than anything else. When you can let go of resentment through this practice of goodwill, peace comes rushing back into your own heart.
Okay, so we've done the inventory, the amends, we're practicing forgiveness. What's the final piece that really locks in this contented sobriety and stops that slide back towards self-focus?
That brings us back to step 12, but specifically the part about carrying the message to others. Service. Turning outward.
Why is service so important?
Because it's the ultimate antidote to self-centeredness. It's how you keep the priceless gift of recovery by giving it away. Focusing on helping someone else takes you out of your own head, out of your own problems.
It provides that sense of purpose and connection.
Exactly. It fosters that sense of well-being that directly replaces the misery and isolation of the dry, drunk state. The principle is simple. You give freely, you receive freely.
And how should someone approach that? Carrying the message.
The advice is rooted in humility. Again, you don't preach, you don't lecture. You simply lay out the kit of spiritual tools, as they call it, and share how they worked for you, your experience, strength, and hope.
No high horse.
Absolutely not. The sources are emphatic. Never talk down to another suffering alcoholic or addict from any kind of moral or spiritual hilltop. You meet them right where they are with compassion and understanding. Fellow traveler to fellow traveler.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive has really taken us on quite a journey, hasn't it? From that painful, tight place of white-knuckle abstinence driven by sheer self-will, fear, resentment, and that depleted brain chemistry.
All the way to this idea of contented sobriety, which is achieved through, well, humility. Rigorous honesty with yourself, surrender, making things right, and then turning outward in service.
Yeah, it's a profound shift. And the change we've been discussing, it's not just about stopping a behavior. It's a fundamental, deep, qualitative change in consciousness. It changes your entire relationship with yourself, with others, with life itself. That's the real prize, moving beyond just being dry.
And that leads us perfectly into the final thought we want to leave you with today. The spiritual sources we've been drawing from, they offer this really powerful insight. They suggest that this work, the changing of your own consciousness through these kinds of dedicated, ongoing practices like prayer, meditation, working the steps, it's actually the only thing that's really worth doing.
Why?
Because the rewards, the internal changes, aren't temporary. They write, every mile gained is gained for all eternity.
Wow. For all eternity. That puts things in perspective. It really does. So here's the question to maybe sit with after listening. If the rewards of doing this deep internal work, committing to honesty, humility, letting go of self-centeredness are potentially that vast, that permanent, what mental habit, what ingrained piece of fear or pride are you maybe putting off changing today?